then it quickly turns into the greatest first date ever because we're walking around, getting hot dogs, seeing the sights of
Looking at
Toronto.
the sunset. Welcome to another episode of Nerd Legion here on Last Free Nation Culture. We didn't have an episode last week because DoA was busy making more people.
Sorry, well, the person had already been made. It was just a matter of bringing them into the world via my wife giving birth to her. But yeah, it's been a crazy week. Thank you. It's been awesome. And it's having a newborn daughter is just the bright light I needed in my life to counteract the episodes of the shows that we're going to talk about today. So it couldn't have come at a better time. Thank you, Scotty. You're wonderful.
I feel bad because I want to like these shows, and we're talking about Secret Invasion and continuing with Strange New Worlds today. I want to like shows, DoA. I want to have a good time, but unfortunately, the shows are not going to let me have a good time. I am praying that in the future, when we do The Witcher Season 3, it's actually good. If we do Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, it's actually, I know that's going to be terrible. I know that one's going to be bad.
I want to believe. And I'm not talking about wanting to believe in aliens, because that's what happened in the last Indiana Jones movie. And Monty hasn't even seen that. He refuses to watch it. I feel like you should. Here's the thing. We'll talk about this more next week after we've seen Dial of Destiny. But I do like things about the Crystal Skull. I don't think it's as terrible as everyone says it is.
God. All right.
It is the worst of the Indiana Jones so far, but it's not as bad. I digress. Let's go. That's my first I digress of the episode. We'll keep count. We'll have a little tracker there or something.
All right. So we are doing the next 2 episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, of which episode 2, the trial episode, I think was the best episode of this season so far, but that is a very low bar.
Slim pickings there, but I agree. Yeah, it was the best of the 3.
And then we had a ridiculous time travel episode.
Wait. Hold on. So for episode 3, here's my thought process as I went through the episode. Real quick, real basic before we get into it, because we'll go 2 then 3. But I was like, oh boy, here's our alternate timeline episode. And then I was like, oh boy, here's our time travel episode. Low budget, gotta shoot in modern day. And then, oh no, it's actually our private unknowable trauma episode. So they switched it up. You were like, which Star Trek trope is it gonna be this episode? And they played with us a little bit on that one. But it ended up settling on the private unknowable trauma episode. Like the Inner Light, only much, much worse than the Inner Light.
All right. So let's start with, we got to get through these quick, but
we got to do episode 2 first.
Episode 2 first. So what happens in episode 2 is that this is the trial episode for number 1, and Una Chin Riley, and she is genetically modified and revealed this to Starfleet. And the whole episode, I was excited about this because it was a classic, I thought, philosophical talking episode of Star Trek, right? Without
normally what Star Trek trial episodes are.
Correct. Without all the, action bullshit that was crammed into the first episode, where it was just action for its own sake. So I was excited that this might be a more like classic episode of Star Trek. And I think it succeeded in certain ways, but also was just hilarious in the way that it was played out in trial. Because, for example, there was a specific law that basically made it so that the entire trial was basically irrelevant, right?
I know. Yes. And I'm like, what? You mean they could have nobody just read the rules properly? And they were like, oh, this is, wait, no, it's okay. Never mind. Like, why did we do this entire thing to begin with?
So basically, for you guys who didn't watch it, what happens is this. She was persecuted as a child because of her genetic modification that she obviously augmenting that she didn't sign up for because she was genetically modified when she was very young. And so then she was persecuted by society, hid it with her family, hid their modifications, and then so she could apply to Starfleet because that was her dream. And at the end of this entire tribunal, They then mention this one rule, which is that a captain in Starfleet can just unilaterally provide asylum to somebody who has been persecuted. Now, the funny thing is that this comes at, of course, the crescendo of the episode. This is the peak of it, right? But in a real trial, you would simply just start with this law. Your entire legal argument is structured on this law existing. And so what's so ridiculous about this is, I will admit that it makes more compelling drama to have this like sudden reveal. But the problem is that it undoes everything else in the episode, such as they tell Captain Pike he can't take the stand because he had previous knowledge that he didn't report. He knew for several months that she had been genetically modified without reporting that information to Starfleet. So they say, you can't take the stand as a favorable witness because you would reveal this information. However, because this law exists, they absolutely should have put him on the stand, because he could have given asylum, and his knowledge of it would have been a key part of this legal argument that they were trying to make at the end of this show.
Here's the thing. When it all comes down to it, the big thing we learned from this episode is that nobody actually knows what Starfleet's laws are. Like, no one's apparently read it. Captain Pike hasn't read it. The council hasn't read it. That guy that looks like a really old troll doll from the 90s, or like a Geico caveman, he didn't read it. Like, nobody knows the rules to Starfleet, right? So, because otherwise they would have arrested her, and on at the moment Pike would have been, hey, wait a second, there's like a law in Starfleet that says this is totally okay, and they'd be like, oh, well, never mind then, you're free to go.
Well, also, it just raises,
I mean, you're right too.
So many questions about the universe. If a captain can unilaterally offer asylum, imagine how ridiculous this could get. You could offer asylum to potentially millions of people without the government having any kind of say. Like, this level of power is rather absurd to give to a captain of a ship, right?
I feel like we've seen it used sparingly in the past. Like, there was Hugh, the Borg that was cut off from the collective that Picard kind of took in for a little while in TNG before he was brutally murdered in Picard season 1 in a very graphic scene where they slowly pull his eyeball out.
Wait,
but
really?
That was a whole different thing. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was you. Anyway, but that's a whole different series, and not one we're going to talk about to watch that much. Thankfully.
I mean, I'm refusing to watch Picard on principle.
Yeah, don't bother. Well, season 3 is great. Season 1 and 2, not so much. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier that it does provide more of a drama in a television sense to have this revelation come at the end. But again, it's drama. It's drama on the most basic surface of levels, because it does, like you said, undo everything that came before it. So it's like, and I hate that. I hate when shows and movies do that, because they're like, oh, here's a big emotional moment. Yeah, but you have to do the emotional moment in a way that makes sense to your story. Otherwise, you might feel that emotion for a second, and then, any reasonable person is going to have that same realization where it's like, well, that kind of just invalidates the entire hour of television I just watched,
Yeah.
So it's, you can do that. It's like I said before, this series, it's like they know the ingredients to make a good Star Trek series, but they just don't understand how to do the recipe right.
Correct.
They don't know how to put it together and cook
Correct. Right, and I think that there are many ways you could write this where it wouldn't have been such a letdown at the end as you thought about it. Because honestly, the acting was quite good in this episode. I liked the lawyer character that they brought in. I thought the underlying themes were compelling. I did think that it was a bit ham-fisted in the way that in science fiction, oftentimes it is used as a means to shed a light on current society, right? You take a different scenario and use it as an allegory for something that is happening in present society. And instead of just doing that, they literally have the lawyer say, remember how all these other people, a very specific list of people, have been mistreated throughout history. It's like, yes, we get that that's what this is about. We understand that this is about prejudice against people who are who they are through no action of their own, right? They were born this way, or, and we know that that's what's happening here. You don't need to literally spell it out for us.
That's the thing that really irritates
insulting.
me with all modern television, pretty much. And all is a very broad brush I'm painting with here, but like a lot of modern television, I should say, they just treat the viewer like they're dumb and like they need everything spelled out for them. And they don't let you sort of like realize anything on your own. And a great example
and there's no ambiguity to it either, right? There's no room for interpretation because they literally just tell you what they want you to think.
Well, so another very good example of this kind of thing too, of just like pushing what they want to tell you with their writing in your face, is when La'an is talking to the lawyer, and the lawyer kind of like manipulates her a little bit, sort of in a friendly way, to sort of like get the information out of her that she needs and all that. And you realize this is happening. It's kind of a cool scene. You're like, oh, cool. She kind of just talked her through this and got the information she needed, but she did it in kind of a friendly way. And, and did it in a helpful way for La'an as well, who's kind of coming to terms, as we'll see soon in episode 3, with her own history. But then the end, La'an is like, why do I feel like I was just hit by a shuttle?
Why do I feel like I've just been hit by a shuttle?
I'll take that as a compliment.
It's like, yes, we know the lawyer character's really smart, and she just did this really cool thing and all that. Like, you don't need to have this extra bit of dialogue that is like, look how smart this person is. Just let it rest. Just let the scene rest and let us just soak in the cool, like, moment of dialogue. Don't throw in the extra crap
I don't know,
make it stupid obvious.
Trust your actors to act with their faces and bodies as a reaction, and we observe this rather than them just saying literally what happened.
Because there's a ton of good actors in this series, and that is a through line. That's a through line to Secret Invasion when we talk about that later, which is where this is a series, both series, with a lot of really talented actors that are just not given the greatest material to work with.
And Emilia Clarke.
But yeah. And well, I'm not as harsh on Emilia Clarke as a lot of people are. I think she's fine. But anyway, yeah, we'll go there.
We'll get there. So, in summary, I felt that this episode had some good ideas. It was okay, but it had some pretty serious flaws, especially in the end, where it literally felt like bad writing, as in I was texting with you, DoA, and then all I said was, and then everyone clapped, which is just how I felt at the end. It's just so tropey.
It was one of those moments, where it's like, I totally showed up the professor in front of the whole class, and the whole class applauded. It's like that meme, you know.
I just wish that they hadn't done the ending the way they had done, because I thought the cross-examination of Admiral April and talking about the Prime Directive and the number of times he's kind of thrown it out showed that there's a difference between the letter and spirit of the law, and that in these very unusual situations, because the Starfleet captains are effectively explorers, they have to be trusted to make ethical judgment calls, which has been a through line of the entirety of Star Trek, and is one of the most interesting parts about Star Trek in general. So I appreciated, she was trying to throw nuance onto Starfleet's principles to show how the reality doesn't often, in practice, these laws cannot often be applied in an ethical manner. So I think there was some cool stuff that was going on. It was just here's the law that we should have brought up at the beginning that would have just invalidated everything that happened in this trial, and also would have given logical reason to put Pike on the stand when he wanted to be on the stand but was told he couldn't be on the stand, because the information that he had actually proves your point to be effective just doesn't make sense from a legal strategy. And then and then everyone clapped and everyone was happy, and like this big,
and everyone did literally clap at the end too. Everyone did literally clap. Yeah.
So anyway,
that happened.
It was okay. Yeah. It was okay. It was the least offensive of the first 3 episodes of this new season, which gets
I want to add one more thing.
Okay.
I want to add one more thing about episode 2, is that it did have what I like in Star Trek series, where it's like the little funny moments that work because you've gotten to know the characters a little bit, where and this entire little scene was set up for this joke, but it felt very TNG and very, very good to me, where it was I forget who it was, but La'an and the Doctor, it was those two watching Spock and then the other Vulcan council member or whatever it was talking at the bar, and the Doctor was like, oh, they totally hate each other and all that. You can tell from like the body language and everything. It just looks like they're having a normal conversation, and then at the end Spock just walks over to them says, "I'm sorry you had to witness that outburst."
That was
And-
great.
and
that was a really good moment.
Yeah, and that was funny. I laughed a little bit, honestly, because
Yeah.
that was a very, Spock thing to do, where, especially because we know right now he's really struggling to control himself emotionally and all that, and he totally did there. You couldn't really tell anything unless you were really watching, but yet he still felt the need to come and apologize. That was a funny little good Star Trek moment, I thought they did that well.
It was also really reminiscent of, I think, particularly The Next Generation, where the characters are they know each other so well because they're all trapped together on this tiny little ship, right? And so their observations of each other are often very keen, and you can really see the differences in personality because they set up scenes like that. I think that's a great point, though. That was one of the best, like, authentic Star Trek moments that we've seen in Strange New Worlds, and it was really good.
Totally. Yeah. So I did like that. And that's what I'm saying about this series, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in a moment.
I mean, the problem is,
they're so close. They're so close to getting it, and it's killing me that they know what they need to do. They just can't quite get there with the writing yet,
As we've said about both TNG and DS9, it took a few seasons for them to get those right, and there are a ton of really terrible episodes in the first 2 seasons of those shows.
Speaking of,
but they did get there in the end. So we can hope that Strange New Worlds. Honestly, some of the episodes in season 1 were pretty good, and so it's a bit surprising that this season has been worse than last season so far.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's okay though. I mean, like you said, I do feel like we do need to give Star Trek series a couple seasons to kind of get a handle on things, and they're getting there. But then you get to episode 3, and it's like 2 steps forward, 8,000 steps back, because
I think I hated this one less than you did.
This was easily the worst episode of Strange New Worlds in the entire series.
No,
and
episode 1 of this season was worse.
Well, was
Juiced
Spock
up
a muck
doctor fight? No, Spock a muck was kind of bad. No, juiced up doctor fight, false flag operation that was easily, like, stealing the Enterprise with the punishment of a hangover. Truly,
this episode was worse.
No, it was not.
This episode was worse. It was. This was the worst episode of Strange New Worlds. It was one of the worst episodes in Star Trek history, I think. And but maybe it's because there's like some personal things here, because I hate it when science fiction shows just decide to shoot an episode in like downtown Los Angeles or Toronto, Canada, apparently in this particular one, because it's like, yeah, we know what like modern day looks like. We're living in it. That's not why I'm watching a science fiction show. I want to see science fiction, right? And this does not do it for me, right? And so I don't like that. That's a pet peeve of mine. I realize that's a subjective, personal thing, but it is something that irritates me with this. And also these kinds of episodes, I feel like, are sort of divergences from forwarding, any sort of main character plot stuff. Because I don't know if La'an really grew from this as we'll kind of get through it. And yeah, I got a ton to say about this. How do you want to get into this one? I don't know. The first thing that I noticed is that at
too much stuffed
8:17
into this episode, as you said on the start of the show, which is that it was a parallel universe thing into a time travel thing into a
private unknowable trauma.
Yeah, private unknowable trauma thing. So it felt like it was just trying to do too much. And oftentimes, by the way, so for example, in previous iterations of Star Trek, when you see these kind of time travel arcs, they're usually, or the best ones, I should say, are over a few episodes, such as what happened with the Bell riots in Deep Space Nine when they went back in time, because it often... It can take a moment to ground the characters in that setting and make a compelling plot and kind of flesh out the world that they're in. Otherwise, it just feels really rushed and weird, which is kind of what happened here. Like, I wish this was a multi-episode arc.
It needed a lot, and there was a lot of really like weird kind of dumb things in this, like the punk rock song that broke out when they like started driving the car real crazy. I was like, oh, you're okay, we're doing this, all right. There was a lot of weird things in this episode, like at 8:17 in the episode, La'an like slams Kirk's desk, and it's really wobbly for something on a starship. That I don't know why I noticed that, but I was like, it's obviously like a very flimsily made prop desk. I mean, because it's a TV show, but still, it was like weirdly wobbly when she hit it. And then they talked about how poutine is still popular in the future, because they knew about it when they went back to Canada of the past. So that's good, because poutine is delicious.
Wait, poutine has gravy? This is amazing.
Can you focus?
And then the other thing where it's like, it is, where when they dropped the wallet in the lady's purse, and they knew that after she looked at those socks, she would just immediately walk out of the store. She wasn't doing any other shopping that day. They just knew. And I was like, this is just
Also,
too
if
badly,
you were hundreds of
just
years in the future,
make it a bit
how
more
would
natural.
you know that device was going to cause an alarm?
That's a great point. I haven't even thought of that.
I mean, how can Kirk
Yeah.
drive a car? Do you understand how hard it would be to drive a car if you had never driven a car in your entire life before or ever been
Yeah.
around cars? How
It took him a couple seconds to figure out the gut break.
it was like one of those moments in the Matrix where he's like, I know Kung Fu, and then just suddenly is a stunt driver. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, here's another thing too. This episode, it was so terrible because there was supposedly a very serious thing that was happening, because obviously Kirk's timeline had been basically ruined. They got sent back to this one thing together, and there's a sense of urgency at the beginning of the episode, and then it quickly turns into the greatest first date ever, because we're walking around, getting hot dogs, seeing the sights of Toronto,
Looking at the sunset.
Exactly. The future's going to be fine.
Kirk's
Don't worry
looking
about
so
it. Let's just
hot,
spend the
you
day in
know?
Toronto, Canada.
Look at his fabulous jawline.
Yeah, there you go. He looks a bit William Dafoe-esque, though, I thought, too.
Yes.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
A less
it was-
weird-looking Willem Dafoe.
or Willem Dafoe. That's what I meant to
Yeah,
say.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I even have Willem written down correctly in my notes, and I still mess it up when I said it. I'm sorry, Mr. Dafoe.
All right, so the premise of this episode, guys, is also just ridiculous because it's one of those things where it initiates just via a Deus Ex Machina, basically, where a guy just he's shot and he just appears on the Enterprise instantly,
Yeah.
hands her this device, and then it's just like, you must save us, and then just dies in the timeline change. I'm like, well, that's a bit
It's literally the plot device.
yeah,
Like
it's the plot device.
that is literally what it is.
And
This
then-
is the device that begins the plot
Yeah.
for the episode.
Yeah, and he's just like, I'm dying. Please save us. You're the only one who could do it. And then
All
the
right.
timeline changes, and then it's just a button that sends you back in the past.
I know. It's
Cool,
such
I
a-
guess. And
it's such a
she has to
dumb-looking
drag.
little-
She has to drag alternate universe Kirk with her. You know, Doa, I actually thought that originally when I watched this, I thought it was a setup for another parallel universe, because the parallel universe trope was very popular in TNG and DS9 and other shows. And honestly, there's some, especially in DS9, there's some really great alternate universe episodes where you have this crossover. The actors get to ham it up and be very different versions of themselves. You know, Kira gets to be a dominatrix and Cisco gets to be a space pirate. Like, it's really funny, actually. And the alternate universe stuff can be really compelling. So I thought that's where this was going, but it was kind of just this really bleak and depressing future where Kirk is telling Spock that he has to die, and
they don't really
needlessly?
explain very well what's happening. We get there's a big war with the Romulans apparently, but then also like they're just deciding to not help all the Vulcans. So it's like, oh, there's Spock. Oh, I guess he's gonna die. Well, bye.
Spock
That's it.
calls them up and says, "Hey, can I have some help?" And Kirk says, "Get fucked."
Nope. That's right. Spock's like, okay, I guess I'll go die.
Guess my entire race is fucked. Thanks, Kirk.
Yeah, that's, you know, there was other little silly things in this. Now the like Kirk being a chess hustler does have roots in the original series. I went and looked it up because I wasn't sure, because like I said
That was
before,
a
I
fun.
haven't watched
That
the
was a
original
fun
series.
moment. Okay, so let's
so
go
that
back.
made
So they go back in time. This new bridge in Toronto explodes. It's a bomb from the future. It's secretly the
Not the bridge of the ship.
Yeah.
It's the other
The
bridge.
That was a cute touch. I thought that was a cute touch. The bridge was a cute touch where the guy says who traveled back in time, you know, go to the bridge. So she walks up to the bridge of the ship, and it was actually the bridge in Toronto when she pushes the button and goes back in time, which means that she probably didn't have to drag Kirk back in time with her.
No.
That was not part of the plan.
It was a great first date, though.
It was a great first date.
Well,
so they go back
until-
and they blow up this bridge gets blown up by the Romulans. The Romulans it happens in both timelines, but secretly the Romulans have a cold fusion reactor and have, I guess, the implication is that they made La'an Noonien-Singh as well.
No, I don't know. The Romulans didn't. No,
Okay.
not at all. That was they weren't related to that at all. Like she was trying to get to Khan to kill him because
but they blew
Khan
up the cold
and his,
fusion reactor in the alternate timeline to kill Khan was the implication. And
because
then
if Khan never becomes the dictator that he did in the past, it
the
never
eugenics wars don't happen.
And it never prompts Starfleet to be created eventually when humanity sort of like gets through all this. So Khan being a dictator that he was the catalyst for Starfleet to be created, for this utopia on Earth to kind of be created. So the Romulans want to kill Khan to prevent that from happening.
Which I think is kind of interesting. I think it's kind of interesting that
that's okay.
Yeah, and I do think that sets up a classic Star Trek ethical quandary, which is that do you take out this person who you know is basically a genocidal tyrant because you know that the end result is going to be something that is far superior, whereas if this great tragedy doesn't happen, it doesn't result in the utopia of the Federation, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's very interesting, and unfortunately, it felt like that aspect of things kind of got lost in the sauce of this weird ass Kirk La'an relationship kiss that doesn't need to happen, and honestly distracts from the episode.
One of my other favorite little things was when she's looking at the camera of the photographer that ends up being the secret Romulan. That's kind of Secret Invasion-esque. We'll get into that later. But anyway, when she's looking at her camera and she looks at the screen and says, "Can this get bigger?" It's like she forgets how screens work and that you can zoom in on things on screens. I'm like, okay, we're in the future. Yeah, tablet devices are very popular in Starfleet in the future, in the 24th century and all that kind of stuff, or 25th, whatever. So it's like, okay, I know you went to the past and you haven't seen like digital cameras, but you should know that a screen can zoom in on things. And just the way she says it, like, can this get bigger? It's like, it just felt very unnatural. It felt like a very forced, they don't know the technology thing, And again, it's another example of, another concept that we like to see in Star Trek and things like that, but they just don't get it quite right. I feel like from the writing department, So there you go. There's that again.
The scene where he's driving recklessly chasing that van and then the cops stop them and then she just convinces the cops to let them go even though they are driving like absolute psychopaths, as if the cops could or would do that just because.
Oh, you're a famous humanitarian doctor? Oh, well then you can drive however you want, sir. No license, no problem. You stole that car? Perfectly fine.
So
don't worry.
No license, no ID of any kind. You imagine if a cop pulls somebody over and they have no record of this person's existence and they are driving like a psychopath chasing people around the city. Now, if I was in their position, I might assume things like they are a spy from another country, right? Because who else does this kind of shit, right? They probably have a reason.
Those roads look slippery too. Those, having lived in the upper Midwest for much of my life, that kind of road where it's just like the little thin layer of wet snow, that is slick. So that was a very dangerous road to drive like that on, Kirk. You should be careful. Slow down, save lives.
So that was ridiculous. I did appreciate though that after building up Kirk and his reckless behavior throughout the entire episode, I did appreciate the touch where when they are waiting at the door to open it and the Romulan agent comes with the gun and thanks them for letting her into the door so that she can kill Khan as a child, that he basically dares her to shoot him. And so she just does it and he dies.
You want to shoot us? Go ahead.
You're bluffing.
Try me.
No.
I thought that was hilarious. Again, we talked about how Strange New Worlds, in the past episode of Nerd Legion, we talked about how Strange New Worlds takes from a lot of tropes, and it did reek of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indy just shoots that guy with the sword instead of fighting him.
I didn't get that at all.
All right, I didn't
get that because he wasn't threatening her. I thought it was fine, but here's what I got out of that, which is where we go back to the private, unknowable trauma thing, where now La'an has gone through this whole big thing that no one else can possibly relate to. And you think back to arguably the best episode of TNG, if not ever in Star Trek, which is The Inner Light, where Picard goes back to live an entire life of this alien species, where it ends up being their way of preserving history because their species is extinct now. And it's a very beautiful, like, touching episode, and he's lived this entire other life, and that stays with him for the rest of the series, and it's a big part of his character. But and that was done so well. And then it's just like, oh, she needs some trauma that she just kind of has to process, I guess, and no one else can really kind of like understand. And so let's just kill Kirk after they had a great date, you know, where it's like, okay, you're seeing Kirk die after you had a great date with him is pretty different than living an entire life and like raising a family and like living in this culture for decades.
Right.
Like, you just, and it's like another example of what I'm talking about, where they know a good type of thing to do, but they just don't know how to do it well, you know?
Yeah, and her trauma over just knowing Kirk, and also because Kirk still exists in her universe and has a very similar personality to the Kirk in this alternate universe. And at the end of the day, too, she knew she was going to get rid of the Kirk from the alternate timeline because they were going to change the future. But I'm not gonna spend time complaining about time travel because it never makes sense in science fiction, right? So there's no point in doing it. It's just a thought experiment, and trying to nitpick it is a futile effort, and you can do it in literally any science fiction that uses time travel at any point. But I think when it comes to Kirk's character, it is very weird that how fast he trusts La'an that her future is better, because he has no evidence of anything from where she just showed up on his ship.
Yeah, she just walked onto the bridge.
gets in a little tussle with him as they like slap each other in his office, and then that sends them back in time. And
Monty, it was a great date. It was a really great first date.
He just trusts that she's telling the truth. For all he knows, this is another problem, like we saw in the first season, or the first episode of this season, where they don't know if the communication from La'an is real. How can he know that La'an is not a Romulan agent?
That's a good point.
There's a secret Romulan agent that they get confronted with. She could also be somebody who is lying, and he just accepts everything that she says at face value and then goes and helps her. It's kind of weird.
So, speaking of weird, I want to go through. I have more on my list of weird things in this episode, because boy, there were a ton of them. So another one, they talked about events that they were doing to slow human progress, and they mentioned the Tunguska event, which is basically, if you're familiar with it, it's supposedly a meteorite that exploded just above the ground and flattened a bunch of trees, and that's all it did. How did that slow the progress of humanity? I don't know. Maybe they were going to build a printing press out of trees. Who knows? Or use the paper to make, I don't know, you know what I mean? My point is that I don't think that slowed human progress, the Tunguska event. And then strange shout outs to Apple and DuckDuckGo.
I think DuckDuckGo must have paid for product placement there.
It had to, right? Because like otherwise you just say like Google it or whatever, you know? I don't even really know what DuckDuckGo is. I'm sorry, but now we're talking about it, so money well spent, DuckDuckGo. Well
you
done.
can sponsor Nerd Legion as well.
Yeah, there you go. Please, we loved your cameo in Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. Huge DuckDuckGo fans. And then also, they get the watch from Pelia, right? Which is kind of fun to go and visit her again. But they get the watch from Pelia that glows when it's around, like reactor stuff. And they decide to just walk around the Toronto metro area, hoping that they get close enough for it to start to glow. Now, Monty, I looked up some information to see just how feasible this would be, right? Because remember, they cannot do this quickly, right? The Toronto metro area is around 6 million people. And it's kind of, I've never been to Toronto, but the Toronto city itself, not even the entire metro, but it's kind of in like an oval. There's like a water in the southern part and then land in the northern part. And to walk the short distance across Toronto, which appears to be south to north or vice versa, according to Google Maps, would take you 7 hours. So if they really did just decide to walk around Toronto, hoping that they would get close enough for this watch to glow, they got amazingly lucky for that to happen.
In that short of a time period.
When that scene was happening, I was like, there's no way they're just going to like randomly stumble across where this reactor happens to be, right? But you know what? The great kiss made it happen.
Yeah. And also,
Yeah.
I don't really understand some character development that they try to put into this show. So they go back to Vermont because she remembered that Carol Kane's character was going to be there. As
Good thing they had that
Pelia.
Conversation.
Right, but
Coincidentally, right before she went to the past.
right, good thing it's just very fortuitous. So Pelia's there, and she's not an engineer, but the implication is that this sets her on the path to becoming an engineer. But to me, that's just unnecessary character development. You could literally just have her already be an engineer, give them the device they need to quickly find the thing. I don't feel like I need a character arc to explain why she became an engineer because La'an told her that maybe she should be an engineer. It's just pointless.
Also, like, it makes you think, are we in an alternate timeline or are we not in an alternate timeline, right?
Yeah.
Like, which one are we deciding on doing for our time travel episode?
Yeah.
It makes it kind of messes that up a little bit too. There's other little things, like when they're walking down the hall and they're following that guy into like the reactor area, and it shows him like going through the door, and then it shows them and they're just like kind of like half hiding behind the thing, but like very clearly in plain sight, not 15 feet away from him. It's like, come on, any human being, unless he just didn't have peripheral vision at all, would clearly see them standing there. So, you know, and also the Romulan agent didn't believe. Yeah, or she didn't believe that there were alarms in the facility too.
Yeah,
it's like, really.
Or also, are palm prints heritable, or is it testing her DNA? In which case, it would be highly diluted from.
No, they did say that. Oh, it must be some sort of DNA thing. They had like a throwaway line to try to explain it, but it still is crazy.
Right, but her DNA was, a dozen generations or whatever, 8 generations diluted from La'an Noonien-Singh. So would that be detectable, right? It's like, why would they set up a DNA test that was any distant relative of La'an Noonien-Singh? That's just dumb.
Speaking of La'an Noonien-Singh, first of all, thanks for not just de-aging Ricardo Montalban to a tiny child. I appreciate that. We actually casted a child to play him. But a couple little things. I think now my suspicion is that La'an is the one who set Khan on his homicidal dictator life trajectory because of the violence he witnessed in his room, and then she just left the gun on the desk in his room. She just left it there.
Also,
she left a gun with a child.
I have
to the future.
I have a very
she brought the watch.
I have a very important question about this. If Khan is supposed to be basically in prison because he's a subject of genetic experimentation, why would they use his DNA as the key to unlock the door?
That's an excellent question. That is a great question that I have no answer for.
Why would they use his DNA as the key to unlock the door when he is clearly supposed to be contained in that facility?
I don't know. I don't know. This episode, nothing made sense in this episode, and it was bad, but in a very bizarre, intriguing kind of way, which I guess kind of redeems it in a slight sense. But man, Strange New World season 2 off to a rough start.
I did like the way they killed Kirk, though, where him just being cocky just resulted in him getting unceremoniously blasted by a gun and then just instantly died. I said, that's some realism right there. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I was wondering if they were going to do it, and they did it. So I thought that was a great moment.
I thought that was a great moment.
And I do want to restate that I'm with you, where we do want to like this series because we do like the actors that they've casted in these roles. I like the characters. I like a lot of things about this series, but it still goes back to that same thing that I've been saying over and over again, which is where they know the ingredients for a good Star Trek show. They just don't know how to cook them properly, So maybe they'll get there. Who knows?
It's like that show Nailed It on Netflix. Where
exactly.
they show people what the professionals have made, and then they get a bunch of incompetent cooks and give them all the ingredients and just challenge them to bake these things, and they always turn out miserably bad. That's what it feels like sometimes watching Strange New Worlds. And sometimes, you get the odd person who kind of gets it right, but it feels still like a very crappy iteration of the original. And that's how I feel watching this compared to Next Gen or Deep Space Nine. But I am hopeful that over with more practice, they might be able to come up with some good Star Trek at some point in time.
I hope so. I was kind of sad because we didn't get more Commander Pike in this episode. I mean, Anson Mount's doing such a great job with that character. He's a super entertaining character. He's
hardly been in the season so far.
I know. Like,
he was
he
in
busy
half
doing
of
something
one
else?
episode.
Oh. are they maybe making like a Black Bolt thing where he's got to like spend a lot of time being Black Bolt in the Marvel universe? Because he was,
really?
if you, in case you know, yeah, he played Black Bolt in the Marvel universe.
Yeah, maybe it was a conflict of filming or something like that.
Yeah, possibly. Well, that'd be kind of cool.
All right. Well, let's move on. Secret Invasion.
Sure.
The latest Marvel show.
Oh boy.
This is Nick Fury's arc with Samuel L. Jackson. Finally, he gets his own show.
Finally.
I will preface this that I have not seen Captain Marvel, so I missed a lot of the context of this show. But you've seen Captain Marvel. I
have. I saw it years ago, though. I saw it when it came out. I thought it was pretty bad. It was probably one of the weakest Marvel films. It just... And the big reason is honestly because a lot of the same complaints I had about Strange Worlds that we were just talking about, where there's lots of just random things that happen in it that just, they don't make sense and they don't really feel like they would work. And then you have things like Captain Marvel, like just doing wanton destruction of other people's property with really kind of no consequence and things. And in a way that seems kind of like mean-spirited instead of your typical superhero, I'm trying to stop a bad guy kind of way. So it's like a lot of that stuff and you know, I don't have any problem with Captain Marvel as a character. I think she's problematic for the universe because she's so powerful. And so if she shows up, she's basically just going to solve everything right there. I mean, look at the end of Avengers Endgame. Just shows up and blasts a hole in the big ship and then just kind of does all that. So she's a problematic character plot-wise because she's too strong. But as a character herself, I think she's interesting and there's no issues there. It's more just kind of like the story they put her in that movie was not great. But it does set up the events of Secret Invasion, which is basically that back in the 90s, Nick Fury and Captain Marvel had a thing with the Skrulls and the Kree, and they ended up kind of giving refuge to the Skrulls on Earth where they could sort of blend in with society.
And the Skrulls, for those of people who don't know, the Skrulls are a race of people who are shapeshifters who can look like any person.
Any person and any inanimate object. They can change clothes and become like a desk if they wanted to too. So it's not just changing your appearance, it's changing your entire, physical, self. But anyway, so Nick Fury promised to give him a planet someday. Here we are 30 some odd years later and it still hasn't happened. Understandably, they're a bit upset. And so one of the Skrulls is named Gavik.
Yes.
Hold on. I think I wrote this down somewhere. Gravik. I'm not good with Skrull names. Gravik. He is leading a rebellion. Not really a rebellion. He's leading an effort to take over the world to make Earth a space for Skrulls instead of humans.
Yeah.
And there we are.
And the premise is that the old leader was this Skrull named Talos, who was friendly with Nick Fury. And we find out later that he actually brought all of the surviving Skrull, which is 1 million Skrull, which is obviously a lot of potential shapeshifters, to Earth. And Nick Fury has not found them a planet. And indeed, Nick Fury has spent the last several years in space on some kind of confusing, vague, space defense project for Earth.
Yeah.
Against invasion.
Right. So basically, out of S.H.I.E.L.D. came Saber, essentially, which is the, S.H.I.E.L.D., in case you're not aware, was sort of the government agency that handled anything supernatural, handled managing superheroes, handled addressing any sort of other supernatural stuff that popped up. Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was a show that is now sadly not canon in the Marvel universe, but went on for 6 seasons, I think it was, on television. And it was goofy and campy, but I really liked it. So I'm sad it's not canon, but I digress. But anyway, so S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of ended up collapsing because it was filled with Hydra. Who knew? They kind of got in there. And now everything's filled with Skrulls. So I guess things didn't really change too much, but at least they're not Nazis. But anyway, S.H.I.E.L.D. became Saber. And so that's where Nick Fury was, hanging out in the space station. Decided to come back because he heard they were making a series that he was going to star in. And so it's time to return to Earth. Yeah.
And the series is made it was made by Kyle Bradstreet, who did Mr. Robot, which I thought it's a good choice for the show.
I haven't seen that.
It's a good choice for the show, just as kind of a low-key psychological thriller. I've only seen the first couple seasons of Mr. Robot, but I thought it was quite well made. And the direction of this show and the look of this show is actually quite good. It has a really muted color palette. I think it's very artfully shot. They do some very interesting things with the Skrull in crowd, where they'll do a camera follow, and the Skrull will walk behind an object and come out as somebody else on the other side to kind of show the confusion of the chase sequences. So that part of the show is quite good. I think visually it's done very, very well. And it does have a slower spy thriller kind of pace to it. By the second episode, it gets conversation heavy, where you get to see the chops of some of the actors like Samuel L. Jackson and Don Cheadle, which makes that scene where they're at the restaurant in London in the second one is probably the best scene of the series, where Don Cheadle and Samuel L. Jackson are talking to each other. So it does have some things to like about it. Unfortunately, as somebody who didn't see Captain Marvel, it feels really badly ordered, because if you don't know about the Skrull, the first episode is just deeply confusing because you're trying to get introduced to this, but they save all of the flashback scenes from the 90s when the Skrulls arrive for episode 2. So you kind of have to hang with it to episode 2 in order to get that background, which it really just makes it very hard to emotionally invest in as a viewer in the first episode of the series.
So very clearly, they realized after last week, when the first episode came out, that nobody knew anything about what was going on with the Skrulls, to the extent it's so obvious that they were like, oh, we need to go back and actually tell people what's going on, because they had like Captain Marvel clips at the beginning of the second episode that was just pure flashbacks to Captain Marvel to explain everything that happened going into this. And I was like, why didn't they have that in episode 1? And I guess they just thought they didn't need it. They thought people were big enough fans of Captain Marvel and the Skrulls to follow along. Well, guess what? Most people didn't like that movie.
And also, so, I don't think it was one of the more successful Marvel movies either.
No, it wasn't. So coming into this, I think they assumed people would remember more than they did. And so episode 2 was a lot of catch up for that. But episode 1 was just kind of odd in general, because I felt like they came into it saying kind of essentially, okay, we're going to be like the Andor of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where we're going to be like slower pace, darker, grittier,
no superheroes, there's no Jedi in Andor, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then but then the first episode, we ended up getting a lot of like kind of meaningless throwaway action scenes and kind of weird stuff, like they're trying to interrogate the guy, and Ben Mendelsohn's character is like, oh no, I got this fight and everything, I'll do it. And Nick just like Fury just shoots him, and you're like, okay, well, I guess we're just not gonna interrogate that guy then, never mind. And so it's like weird little things like that.
Well, it's also the way it starts with Martin Freeman actually being a Skrull, and he goes and talks to this just very stereotypical like conspiracy guy who's going crazy and has all the strings on the walls and all the clippings on the walls.
Guy.
Yeah, conspiracy exposition guy.
Let me tell you who the Skrulls are.
yeah.
Chaos. And that's only the beginning. 5 global terrorist strikes within the past year, each one claimed by a different group.
It's business as usual.
That's precisely what they want you to think.
But the problem is that while Talos, the good Skrull, the former Skrull leader, is there, you don't really understand the motivation behind the Skrulls, because the whole premise of the show is that the Skrulls are creating false flag operations to send the world into what we can only assume is a nuclear war, because they are immune to radiation. So any kind of fallout they would not be affected by. And they're trying to, create terror. The first episode is them setting off a radioactive dirty bomb in the center of Moscow to frame the Americans for this. But what doesn't make sense is the same shit that didn't make sense about the false flag operation in the first episode of Strange New Worlds, which is, if you are Nick Fury and you are in Moscow, right? And if you are Maria Hill and you are in Moscow, why would you not just tell the Russian government that this is happening? Because that means if you are American agents, intelligence agents in Moscow, you let them know so that, first off, they can help you, and so that they know that you, the Americans, are not doing it, right? That
Maybe
you
it
are
was
there
an
to
alien
help
thing.
them to stop it.
Maybe
Because
they didn't want to tell them that they were Skrulls. Maybe the Russian government didn't know Skrulls existed, and we didn't want to reveal it.
you don't have to
I
give
don't
them
know.
that information. You just have to say that there is a dirty
That's true.
bomb terrorist attack. We are chasing these guys. We literally know where they are, right?
All I'm gonna say is Agent Coulson wouldn't have messed that up. I'm just gonna leave that out there.
So anyway, I think that is confusing, and then also the it's hard to get emotionally invested in this show because even through the second episode, the motivation behind the Skrulls doing this is also really confusing. I get that they want their own planet, and it is described better, and I think that it is a unique view on the series that you get because I don't think this paints Nick Fury in a great light because he basically made promises and then ignored them, and so this kind of conflict is, to a certain degree, his fault for happening because he didn't follow through on his promise to give them a home. And indeed, kind of nefariously used the Skrull as his own little secret operatives as part of his spy network. So it's like
Nick
they
Fury
helped
is not
him.
the good guy here.
Yeah, they helped him, and then he fucked off and didn't help them in return. And so I understand that they're angry about that. But the motivation is kind of not explained very well in the first episode of the series, and it's full of just logical holes and is kind of silly. But it does. I thought the second episode was significantly better than the first episode.
100%. I do want to just touch base on one thing really quick, that I do find it entertaining that they've decided to make Nick Fury look like an old whaling captain in this series.
He looks good.
Like he looks like a grizzled sea captain
He does.
with his beard and his little hat and all that and his trench coat. Yep, looks like he would be right at home on a salty sea sprayed whaling ship in the 1800s.
It does make you wonder if they are going to go for some Ahab analogies at some point during this series. Like I could definitely see those parallels being drawn at some point. But the cast,
the death of Maria Hill too, that could be his kind of motivation for being kind of crazy like that. Yeah.
I think the casting is good, and after the second episode and we saw the flashbacks to the 90s, and I do have a lot of questions because at the end of the second episode you find out that Nick Fury is married to a Skrull, which by the way, if you promise the Skrulls to find them a planet and then your wife is a Skrull, you think you would prioritize that a little bit more. Don't you think she was, in their marriage saying, hey, honey, remember how you promised my people that planet? Could you go do that?
Also, hey, honey, thanks for coming back from the space station. It's been years since I've seen you. How have things been? Like, it is kind of, she was very accepting.
I think we learned something about Nick Fury's sexual preferences as well, because if you were married to a Skrull, wouldn't you want her to always appear to be young?
Not necessarily.
I mean, maybe she could appear to be anything. Yeah. Sounds pretty sick to be married to a Skrull. I don't know. It's the same question. It's the same question as banging Odo in DS9.
Oh no,
he could be anything. He could be anything.
He could be anything. The possibilities are endless.
The possibility marrying a Skrull sounds great.
But Disney Plus only goes so far, and that length apparently is having Queen Elizabeth cut the fingers off of tied up people.
Yeah, Olivia Colman is great in this show.
Oh yeah. She was great in The Crown too. That's why I brought up the Queen Elizabeth thing. She played Queen Elizabeth in The Crown. Yeah.
What I love about the way they've used her is, first off, she actually is the bright pop of color visually in a lot of these scenes because her clothing really stands out from the kind of dark palette that you're using for the rest of the show, but also because she's sort of like a Mary Poppins of spies. She's this jolly, seemingly innocent, whimsical character who just comes in and brutally tortures people and then just crawls away from the scene. But she is very Mary Poppins-esque, which it's a fun character. I really enjoy her.
She is my favorite character in the show right now, hands down, because she just plays it so sincerely. Like there's no question about there's questions about who this person is, but there's no questions about this character's personality,
Yeah. And visually they set her up very well. But I do enjoy the thought experiment of what would happen if Mary Poppins was a brutally efficient spy who is willing to extract information at any ethical price. It's fun.
I was wondering if they were going to bring back Julie Louis-Dreyfus' character, who was setting up, I forget the name of it now, but it's kind of like the alternate like anti-hero Avengers, basically, where she was recruiting like the guy at the end of Captain America, the Disney Plus Captain America show and things like that. I'm looking it up right now because I can't remember the name of that. Like she recruited the Patriot, the guy who was kind of like Captain America for a day kind of thing. But so I was wondering if they were going to bring her back, because she is, if it kind of follows the comics as I understand them, she's sort of gathering her own little sort of like Avengers style crew, but they're sort of, edgier and maybe not as good of good guys as the actual Avengers, So it seems like it makes sense to bring her back for this, but
yeah, and clearly we're heading towards, with this series, some sort of reveal that the president or Don Cheadle's, War Machine, is a Skrull potentially. Maybe Olivia Colman is a Skrull. Like there's
Shooter McGavin is a Skrull. Yeah. What was his name? I'm terrible with actor names. Christopher McDonald. Yeah. Who famously played the villain Shooter McGavin in not Billy Madison. Happy Gilmore. The other Adam Sandler movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you see him pop up. He's a great character actor.
Yeah. So I'm intrigued as to where this goes. They've already revealed. I think one of the weaker parts of this was they had that council of Skrulls with Gravik where they just immediately agree to his plan, even though one of them is dissenting. And also, He's
intimidating, though.
I have a lot of questions, DoA, about the Skrulls in general, because I feel like they must have replaced real people, because remember, they only got here 30 years ago, and some of these people are playing people who are older than 30 years old and who are in positions of power, like literally the Prime Minister of the UK, the head of NATO's armed forces, right? They've worked their way into these positions of power. But obviously, if you were the Prime Minister of the UK, you had to have killed that person 30 years ago and then taken over their life.
Well, we know they're doing things like that.
Because otherwise you would have to have a record of this person's. If you're a famous person, you would have a record of your life pre-1995. You couldn't just invent this person and show up. So
we know
it stretched believability.
In episode 1, they did have like all those people who were captured, and the one Skrull who joined Gravik's crew like took the memories from that guy.
That's
so
true.
We do know that they can do that, and they are doing that. So I feel like you're right. There's probably evidence that they did actually replace formerly human people. So.
Yeah. So it is interesting to see, them manipulating the power. Although I will say that in that council meeting, they bring up, what would happen if what's your plan if the Avengers come back? And Gravik's like, he just says, Gravik just says, I have a plan if the Avengers come back. And they said, oh, well, you got a plan. Okay. They don't ask what the plan is. They just say, you're right. Well, you do have a plan, Gravik. So you know what? We're all in. We're all in. You son of a bitch. I'm all in on your crazy take over the world plan.
And what happens if the Avengers return?
You don't think I thought about that? Put your faith in me, and I promise your loyalty will be repaid.
To be fair, this is the same species that trusted that Nick Fury would find an entire planet for them. So they may be a bit on the gullible side. Let's be honest. Skrulls are very maybe a little bit too trusting of people. So I feel like that's right in character with the Skrulls to be like, oh, okay. Oh, free planet later? Great. It's like, oh, you got a plan for the Avengers? All right, we believe you. Sounds very Skrull to me at this point.
Yeah, you can be the dictator of our entire species. Because what they do is basically, I use dictator in the literal Roman sense, where in times of crisis, the Senate would nominate a dictator to simplify control in that crisis, and then the dictator would return power to the Senate upon completion of whatever crisis, resolution of said crisis. So that's kind of what they're doing here in this story, which makes sense.
So I had a couple little issues with episode 2. I do agree it was much better, and it is much more of what I expected the show to be. And if the rest of it's like that, I think it's going to be pretty good. But there were a couple little things continuity wise. At the end of the first episode, we saw Nick Fury run away from Maria Hill's body. At the beginning of this episode, he's mourning over her until he gets beat up, like somebody attacks him. So that was kind of weird. And then we have the scene where Ben Mendelsohn impersonates someone else to convince the guards on the train that Nick Fury isn't in there. And then Nick Fury and Ben just start screaming at each other for like 5 minutes. And I'm like, these must be the most soundproof train cars in the history of trains, because those guards were not like 10 feet down the hall. And I don't know how they didn't hear that. So there's a couple little things there, but I'm willing to forgive that, because overall the second episode felt really like what the first episode should have been. And I feel like now we're maybe getting on track for what could be kind of a fun series. So we'll see.
Yeah, the premise is good, and I do think that the concept of having discretion that Nick Fury brings up, which is that people can't even deal with each other, what would happen if we had to deal with an entire other species, I think does speak to the paranoia of human nature. And I think that if this information were to go public, obviously it would spark a world crisis of who can be trusted, and it would be absolutely disastrous. So I do understand that this entire thing basically needs to be kept covert, which makes it kind of, the intrigue is what makes this show interesting, and it has logical reasons to be covert in the first place, which I like.
I think part of it too is that like there's so many actors in this show that I could just listen to them talk all day. Like because the way they deliver dialogue is so good. And even if like the scenes are kind of corny or something like that, they like dominate. Like Ben Mendelsohn is great. He was a villain in Rogue One. He was awesome there. He was like, that was one of the best parts of that movie, was his character. Obviously, like Samuel L. Jackson is fantastic in everything he's in. I can listen to him tell stories all day. Like, I mean, we mentioned Olivia Colman already. She was fantastic in The Crown. She's great in this as well. And I think the list can kind of go on from there, where there's a lot of really, really good actors that have come together to make this series. So I want it to be good so badly, because we already know that there's a lot of really great talent involved in this thing. So
and Emilia
episode
Clarke.
1, well, I mean, okay. So I again, I'll say the thing I said earlier. I don't think she's as bad as everyone says. I think people like to rag on her, and
She's
I
terrible,
think
though.
I don't.
She can't act. So
I think she can be a little bit flat at times, but
you pick one of these things. Which of these things is true? Do her characters suck, and the writers who write her characters suck, or does she suck? Because one of those things has to be true. She doesn't do anything in this. She didn't do anything in Game of Thrones. She was terrible at playing Daenerys Targaryen. And granted, Daenerys was a very badly written character by the end. And also, she had to act opposite Kit Harington, who is also a very bad actor. And then on top of that, they had no synergy together. So it was a perfect storm of like her looking bad. But
you have to balance the actors that are a little bit low key with actors that kind of bring the energy up a little bit. And I will say, I do think for this series, for Secret Invasion, her character is bad. She just hasn't really been given anything to do.
She just stands there most of the time observing, because she's being set up to become a double agent for Nick Fury, right? That's clearly where this is going.
I didn't mind the Daenerys Targaryen portrayal, because like I feel like that character was a character that was like extremely traumatized right from the very beginning. And so the way of and so you could look at this in a way of playing it in a dull, flat way. I think of it as a way that this character is just like kind of numb to a lot of things, and then at the end just goes insane. I didn't like the end of Game of Thrones at all, and I'm not a huge fan of Emilia Clarke or anything like that. I just think people are too hard on her. That's all.
You don't have to have the most compelling main characters in a series. I mean, she's
not a main character.
I love The Expanse.
Well,
I love The Expanse, but James Holden, both the character and the actor, are terrible. They are. His character is boring, and Stephen Strait does a terrible job of acting. But I still love The Expanse, because everything outside of that character, and he's kind of like the straight man in all of it, it does sort of work all the same, in the same way that most of Game of Thrones worked, even though Daenerys was played quite badly, I think, by Emilia Clarke. Now, we also know that she had a tragic stroke or whatever during that probably, deeply affected her ability to play that role. She had some,
she did?
Yeah, some really serious medical issues during Game of Thrones.
I didn't even know that. Wow.
Which is
okay.
like, very unfortunate.
Wow.
But yeah, I've never liked her as an actress, and she hasn't done anything yet in this this series.
Yeah, but I think in Secret Invasion, she hasn't done anything yet through no fault of her own. Because, like, again, her character is kind of there to just be sort of motivation for Ben Mendelsohn's character, kind of.
Yeah. So she had she had a hemorrhage and she had an aneurysm basically that gave her aphasia. So apparently at one point she couldn't remember her own name. So that's like really serious. But yeah. Yeah.
So anyway. As Monte makes himself look like more of just a really mean person, I'd say let's wait and see what Emilia Clarke's character can do. Because right now Gaia her character's name is Gaia, I think, right?
Yeah.
Gaia, not just hasn't done a whole lot, but we'll see.
She's getting the information because what they're setting up is that the Skrull are going to be modifying themselves genetically off of Groot, I guess, was the implication, because she was on the little old DOS computer looking up, Groot, and it seems like they were taking DNA from various aliens. And so,
oh, really?
Yeah, the doctors seem like they're going to make super Skrulls or whatever from the DNA that they've been harvesting.
It's funny you mentioned the word Super Skrull because there is a character in the Marvel universe called Super Skrull that does take on the abilities of other superheroes and things like that. So I think you may have cracked the code. I think we can make a pretty solid position or a pretty solid prediction that the answer for the Avengers is Super Skrull. And that's probably Gravik's late game plan. I'm putting in like video game terms now. That's his late game build. Super Skrull.
He seems weirdly confident that he can genetically engineer a Super Skrull that can defeat the Avengers. You think you would have that completed before you started this plan, right? Not just like I hope
Skrulls take a lot of things on faith.
I hope that this is done by the time before the Avengers kill us.
Yeah, again, Skrulls take a lot of things on faith. Like, hey, Gravik, we can make you a Super Skrull just in case the Avengers ever show up. He's like, oh, cool. Should I just start the plan? You can get it done. Like, I mean, we've got a little bit of time.
Remember that
the stakes... Get it done by then. They're like, of course we can, Gravik. He's like, oh, okay, cool. Let's start. Yeah.
Remember that the stakes of this are literally the extinction of his entire race. So you would think he would finish the Super Skrull project and be really sure that it was going to work before he starts fucking with the Avengers.
It's like Limp Bizkit said in that one song, MonteCristo, you gotta have faith.
Also,
which they totally wrote and wasn't a remake of someone else's song. That was entirely their own original material.
Also, by the way, DoA, if you could make a Super Skrull that could defeat the Avengers, why don't you just go kick the Kree's ass?
Well, because they hadn't made it yet.
But if you could make it, I'm just saying, instead of trying to take over Earth, this entire plan, if you could make a Super Skrull that was capable of defeating the Avengers, why wouldn't you just take it and defeat your old nemesis with it and then take your planet back?
I mean, maybe that's step 2.
But why do they need Earth then?
Because it's nice. Earth is nice.
I don't know.
And also he's mad at Samuel L. Jackson.
I would unleash it on my ancient enemy first before trying to kill the Avengers.
They're also mad at Nick Fury. Remember, Gravik was a little kid when Nick Fury, had them all take the pledge and join his club, and now he's mad. So I think part of it's personal. Part of it's personal as well. So yeah, I think that's the reason as well. Yeah.
All right. Well, guys. That's gonna do it, I think, for this episode. Final thoughts. I thought Secret Invasion was actually getting better. I really hated the first episode, but then by the time I got more context in the second episode, it felt like it was maybe going to a place where it might be okay.
Yeah, episode 2 for Secret Invasion it did change my opinion on the series and gave me hope for the trajectory of it. I will still say, despite everything we said about Strange New Worlds, I kind of like watching that better than Secret Invasion right now, because
it's dumb, but it's entertaining.
And with Secret Invasion, I kind of know what I'm in for. With Strange New Worlds, I have no idea what they're going to try, but no matter what it is going to be like memorable for some reason. So I do look forward to Strange New Worlds each week more than Secret Invasion.
I will say that Strange New Worlds even when it's bad, is still kind of entertaining, which is a plus for it.
I like the characters, and that's why I'm willing to keep going with it, right? Because you see the potential in that series. It really could be a great series, you know? They just got to fix a couple things, you know? So, yeah.
All right.
Have us write for them, maybe. I don't know.
All right, so next week, I think we're going to have to do Dial of Destiny. I am very sad that I'm actually going to go watch this movie because as you alluded to before, DoA, I successfully avoided Kingdom of the Crystal Skull because I didn't want it to ruin Indiana Jones for me. But for the sake of you viewers, I will ruin Indiana Jones for myself with Dial of Destiny.
The thing is, nothing can ruin anything for you unless you allow it to. I'm a Star Wars fan, so I'm living proof that people can do horrible things with an IP that I love, and I can still love it, you know? I will not allow it to ruin me.
All right.
You choose.
I appreciate your fortitude. So I think we'll be doing that. Maybe we'll see the Witcher as well over the next couple of weeks, because the first part of season 3 has just been released. So maybe we'll weave in some Witcher next week as well. There's only been 1 episode out so far, I believe. So
we'll come back to these 2 series as well.
We'll come back and finish these seasons out. Also, can't wait for Twisted Metal, the TV show coming out at the end of July. That's gonna be a ride.
It's
with
gonna be
Will
fun.
Arnett
No
as the voice of Sweet Tooth, the series we all wanted.
I can't believe they're making this. It looks like they're just kind of going crazy with it, which I think is what you have to do if you're going to make a Twisted Metal TV series. And yeah, I think that'll be pretty fun.
Yeah, I'm actually low-key excited for that. All right, guys. Yeah. We will see you next week back on a regularly scheduled program.